we have done a vast amount of work. We've got leading expertise from around the world in terms of our development partner and also our consultants.
Which were the consultants who helped you with the calculation that's referred to in paragraph 2.13, which turned out to be wrong, so that 2/3 of the 12 billion reduction was due to errors in the way passenger demand was modelled? Which were the consultants that made that mistake?
This was the original, this was the modelling error in 2010, I think.
I'm looking at the modelling error referred to between March 2010 and February 2011, where benefits reduced by 12 billion. This is the first bullet point of paragraph 2.13. Which were the consultants involved in that miscalculation?
The consultants then were Atkins, who were then our consultants undertaking the modelling on our behalf.
Mr. Rutnam earlier referred to the study in 2010, the London to Birmingham 5 rail-based options study. That was undertaken by Atkins, yes?
Correct, yes.
Is that the same thing that we're referring to here in this paragraph?
It's not the same piece of work.
It's not the same thing?
It's not the same piece of work, same firm.
No. Okay, so it's a different piece of work. Mr. Rutnam, you said earlier that passenger forecasting was an industry-led process.
The passenger demand forecasting.
Passenger forecasting was an industry-led process.
As I understand the PDFH process, yes.
Right, okay.
But we participate as well.
Right. When you say industry-led, to whom are you referring?
I'm afraid I would have to come back to you on the details of the way in which the PDFH process is run. I think I think that there is a committee, a group of industry professionals who oversee the development of the PDFH
You'd have to come back. Let's just deconstruct that for a second. You'd have to come back to me on who it is that is leading the process of developing passenger forecasts.
It includes, for example, Network Rail, the regulator, I believe, train operating companies.
You believe?
And the department.
I mean, I would hope these things were pinned down so we knew where we were getting our passenger forecasts from. Because it's not as if we haven't been here before. No. I mean, the Millennium Dome, you may remember, revolved around certain levels of forecasts of visitor numbers. If you look at the Navan Centre in Northern Ireland, it was visitor numbers that went horribly wrong. Passenger numbers do have a habit of being wrong, so I'd like to know, if it's an industry-led process, who it is that's doing it.
I don't think there's any difficulty in coming back to you, Mr. Bacon.
What I'm surprised by is that you don't know now, because this is central.
I can tell you that as I understand it, there is a industry committee which comprises the parties that Alison has referred to, Network Rail, the train operating companies. I think it also involves the Association of Train Operating Companies, which is the trade body that coordinates TOC activities, the department, which oversees the development of the PDFH methodology. It's a well-established mechanism, a well-established methodology, and by the way, it also has a good track record of, in terms of the relationship between forecasting and outturn.
Really?
Well, it's not according to the bullet point here in 2.13. It doesn't, because the forecast, the apparent benefits reduced by 12 billion, and 2/3 of that reduction was due to errors in the way passenger demand was modelled.
That was a different matter altogether. That was to do with an error in one of the complex models operated by Atkins for this purpose, which involved an element of double counting, I think, to do with interchange. Completely separate matter from PDFH.
Just get on the record, Mr. Rutnam. Fantastic ability to forecast. We've had it wrong in front of this committee on the East Coast main line, and we've had it, and that created a bankruptcy which the government had to jump in on. And we had it wrong on HS1, which again created a massive subsidy for the taxpayer on that. But don't look.
I'm not sure that's specifically to do with PDFH, I have to say.
Well, it was the model used to predict passenger numbers was completely wrong.
In one, as I recall, there was overbidding effectively by a franchisee taking on the franchise.
No, it was a wrong assessment of the number of people who would use HS1.
And in HS1, in HS1, which we discussed last year, as we discussed then, I completely accept that the assessment didn't allow sufficiently for the potential behavioural response to the creation of HS1.
Well, that's behaviour. That forecast about passenger numbers was wrong.
PDF5 wasn't even used in HS2 so far.
Well, it was the earlier version. It was
the one that gave you more favourable looking numbers. Yeah.
We've always used the version which is used in department's guidance.
What I was really going to get to is that the point I was really trying to get to is this. The industry has an interest in this project going ahead, doesn't it? Because then it gets to build rolling stock, it gets to build track, it gets to employ lots of people, the government pays it lots of money. The industry has an interest in this project going ahead, doesn't it?
The industry is generally supportive of it. I have to say, I think the commercial interests of the operators or the parties in the industry are by no means clear in relation to the project.
Well, there's
not least because it's a long way off. The industry is supportive.
There's a depressingly small amount that is clear, including the strategic case and the benefits case. But let's just leave that for a minute. What I'm really getting at is, you say this process of forecasting passenger numbers is essentially industry-led. You're essentially handing the process of forecasting how successful this is going to be to the people who will benefit from its being constructed, aren't you?
No, not at all. The industry is supportive, first of all, because it sees the strategic arguments which I was trying to outline earlier. We have seen huge growth in rail demand and rail passenger volumes, and the network will not cope if that growth or anything like it continues into the future. The industry recognises that capacity is a central to the strategic case for this project. That's the first point.
Of course, Mr. Narutnam, we did discuss this last time when you were here to talk about HS1. Of course they would, because they're not broadband providers, they're train operators, they're constructors of railway track, they like trains, they want more of them. Their interest is that this goes ahead, and you're handing to them the leadership of the process by which you establish passenger forecasts. What you've not put in here is any of the counterfactuals, which I tried to discuss with you last time, and after about 8 or 9 times of asking, finally got from you the admission that you hadn't asked yourself what would happen if you spent £32 billion, for example, on broadband, let alone Mr. Jackson's question about what would be the potential effects, economic and other, on spending this money on a whole series of discrete different projects that would produce quicker returns and higher benefit to cost ratios. But you haven't done that, have you? So really, you haven't done that work, you haven't done the counterfactuals, or as it were, the opportunity costs, and you're handing the forecasting of the leadership of the forecasting of the passenger numbers to a group of people who want this to happen.
I completely reject that, I have to say. I do not accept at all that the department is simply handing over to the industry the methodology to be used in appraising this project. The department makes decisions on the methodology to be used. It has a very well-defined process.
You keep on moving it.
It has a very well-defined process for deciding on its methodology.
If it were that well refined,
its methodology is internationally respected, and indeed in many ways it leads the standard around the world.
Mr. Ratnam, if it were that well defined, it wouldn't have suddenly produced an 8 billion hole quite recently, because the calculations were so bad.
That is not to do with the methodology, that is to do with if you're talking about the error in 2010, that is to do with an error in the application of the methodology, made in fact by a consultant working for HS2 Ltd and identified by our own quality assurance.
Most of our taxpayer constituents will not really care about which £8 billion error you made. They're just distrustful of your ability to get this right, frankly. And you did say that the process of forecasting passenger numbers is industry-led, didn't you?
I said that the process of developing the passenger demand forecasting handbook is industry-led, as I understand it. We then make decisions on which elements of the passenger demand forecasting handbook should be incorporated into our own methodology. Could I just observe, and this is a passing observation, if the industry was so concerned to sort of, in your analysis, to sort of present the most favourable possible case for HS2, why has PDFH been revised in the way that it has?
Well, the history of many of these projects is that the goalposts repeatedly moved until the project gets to the point where it basically can't be stopped, and there's a lot of academic evidence that supports that. And if you want to look at the references, you can read the book that I just wrote that came out a week ago.